Hello, this is Brian Leally with the TM Group. Hey, just wanted to share with you today a way that we can use dimensions to help enforce business rules within our organization. So not only can we use dimensions to tag an attribute to a transaction and later use that for reporting on that particular attribute, like department or division, something like that, for example, which is a great feature. But we also have the ability to build in some business rule functionality within those dimensions. So today I want to show you a couple different ways you can do that to help you maybe get those transactions in the system more consistently and more accurately throughout your organization. So today I want to show you a few different ways that we can set up our business rules within those dimensions and put in some logic that will help our users make sure that we're tagging transactions properly and getting the most out of our dimensions. Let's start by talking about the dimension setup. So we'll jump into the dimension setup here and I'll show you how we have this organization set up. So we've got 10 different dimensions in this organization, which is a lot. I mean, I admit not many organizations may go to that extreme, but if you have an organization that tracks maybe different types of activities within your business, this is a great way to allow you to do that without having to uh, potentially make multiple companies. So you can actually do multiple different types of activities within an organization, and the dimensions really allow us to track those transactions and then later again report on those types of activities. So within this organization we have 10 different dimensions, as I mentioned, and we can look at those dimension values. I'll just show you department as an example. So we go into our dimensions and then we set up our dimensions here, and then we apply the values for that particular dimension. So if I go to dimensions and dimension values, you can see that my departments, I've got these different departments within this dimension. So we would do that throughout all of our dimensions. We'll give different values that we can select when choosing that particular dimension in a transaction. So very cool there. Now, one thing that we do, I'm going to jump into the general ledger setup now, because the first thing that you want to do when you're setting up your dimensions is go into the general ledger setup and identify which are going to be the primary or global dimensions. Business Central allows us to manage two global dimensions. And when I say global dimensions, those are the two dimensions that are going to allow you to be used throughout the system. So it's kind of the built-in functionality. You don't have to really do anything else in order to use those dimensions. They're going to always be out there for you. So we define those in our general ledger setup. So here you can see I've got department and product line as my global dimensions. So those allow us to use those dimensions throughout the system, as I mentioned. So now you can see here, I also went beyond just my two global dimensions, and I've added the other dimensions. So I've got up to 8 different dimensions here, you can see. So these dimension shortcuts, identifying a dimension here as a dimension or as a shortcut dimension, allows me to drop that dimension on the grid or the data entry row of a transaction. So if I'm doing a journal entry or a sales order, I can actually pull any one of these dimension values into that transaction so that my user can drop down a menu or drop down that value and select from there within the transaction. So that gives us a ton of capabilities. Again, so now I've got 8 different transactions or 8 different dimensions that I can actually add to my data entry line for my users to take advantage of and identify transactions with our dimension setup. So pretty cool there. So let's take a look at now how we can set up some business rules. So this is where we're heading today. I want to show you how you can enforce some business rules to help accuracy and consistency with our transactions. So let's jump into this. So the first thing that I want to show you is how do we enforce the usage of a particular dimension. So let's say office supplies. We have a budget for that. We've given a budget for each department. And I want to make sure that when our transactions are hitting that office supplies account, that they define which department they're going to. That way I can track against that budget. So I want to make sure that every time that office supplies account is used, that we enforce that a department dimension is selected. So how do we do that? We jump into our chart of accounts and we'll find our office supplies account. So here we go, office supplies. Here it is. So I pull up the GL account card. So here I am in the card. And from here, I can go to the, let's see, where do I go? I go to account and dimensions. And from here, I can define which dimension. So you can see I've selected the department and I stated that that code is mandatory. So now what that does is it gives me the opportunity to enforce and make sure that a transaction can't be posted without a dimension value or a department value being selected. So that's the first way that we can enforce one of those business rules. So we can do that, and I can do multiples. I don't have to stop at just one. So if I wanted to add other dimension requirements on this GL account, I could certainly do that. You can go all the way up to your full dimension list if you would like. So this is just one example. So that's how we can enforce in a transaction that a particular department is selected for a transaction. Very cool. All right, and then another way that we can set up business rules, I'm looking at my notes so I don't miss anything for you guys. So similar to requiring a dimension on a GL account, we can also set up a business rule which is specific, or hold on, which will require a specific dimension when a particular record is used. Okay, so let me state that in a way that everyone can understand. So let's say anytime I use a customer record, I want to make sure that we're using a product line because our customer transactions always relate to our product line. So I can enforce, the usage of that product line. So it's really requiring by dimension. So the previous example, we required by GL account number, but now I'm saying, hey, I want whenever this customer record appears in a transaction, so a sales order, anywhere across the system, I want to enforce that a product line is selected for that. So I get full visibility of all the activities wrapped around that customer's activity. So how do we do that? Let's go back to our dimension list here. And we're going to go to our product line. So if I go to product line, you can see from here, I can go to dimension and then my account type default dimension. Okay, so, and this took a minute for me to get my arms around when I started using it, but I'm like, man, this is really powerful. So from here, as I mentioned, what we do is we select the table. So I selected in this example, our customer record. So whenever that customer record is affected, and keep in mind, we've selected this on the product line. So we're on the product line dimension and we said, hey, whenever a customer record is affected, make the code mandatory, meaning you have to select a product line when dimension value when you're creating this transaction. So kind of a twist on requirements there, but very powerful. Again, it's helping us increase that accuracy and consistency for our reporting, because now I'm not going to have those, well, what about all the stuff that didn't get tagged properly, right? So this gives us the ability to really make sure that those transactions are appropriately marked and will have the dimension values that we're requiring for our business. And again, in the end, it's all about the reporting, right? So that's where we're heading there. All right, so that's how we do that. So it's setting a default value. I could set a default value, and I couldn't think of a really good example of what I would do, but if I had, you can actually set the default for that too. So I'm going to leave that open because I just want them to select the dimension value. So I want them to pick from the list in a transaction, but you can actually default in a value so that every time a customer record is hit, maybe we hit retail or something like that. I'm not quite sure. But anyway, so this is how we would do that. So this is actually requiring a dimension value when a particular record in the system is used. Very powerful stuff. Very cool. All right, so next we're going to jump into dimension combinations. Okay, so here's the example. In my organization, you can see I also track grants. Okay, so grants are tracked, and I want to make sure that only specific departments, I believe it's departments, yes, it's departments that I'm using. So I want to make sure that only specific departments are using that grant or are assigned when a grant is selected in a transaction. For example, I don't want my production department to be used whenever a grant is, because that just doesn't fit, right? Or my sales department, my sales guys aren't really working with grants. So when I have a grant selected in a transaction, I don't want them to see or be able to select the sales as a department for that transaction. So what I can do is I can limit the amount of, or the dimensions, or excuse me, the departments that those grants can be associated with. So we'll check out how we set that up, and that is through dimension combinations. And just as a heads up, I've done bookmarks, and that's why you're seeing these guys in my menu. So if you're not familiar with bookmarks, I love using these things because it just drops all those selections in your menu, and you don't have to keep going up here and searching for stuff. So anyway, dimension combinations is how we get here. So I'm looking at my grants, okay, and you can see here's the grant dimension. And on the department, I want to limit what items are able to be selected there. So when I look at this, you can see I am allowing these, so it's by grant. So it knows what grants are in my system. And it says, all right, so by grant, what departments are you able to post a transaction to? So you can see I've blocked out production, and I've blocked out sales. So neither of those departments can charge anything to these grants. And again, it's kind of enforcing how our business operates. It just wouldn't make sense to have a production charge against a grant in our environment. So we're going to block that department from being from having ability to charge to it. So this is how we do that. So it's by dimension combinations, so we can assign that. And there's different, so if I select this, you can see it gives me an option. It's either open or blocked, okay? So everything else is open. If you want to limit from that prediction or particular department, you just block it. So you'll notice when I go back to the main screen, there's some limitations in there, and I drill into that and find out what the limitations are, and you can configure it that way. Very powerful. Again, it's giving us that ability to enforce our business rules and create consistency and accuracy in our data entry. Very important. All right, so cool. And let's do, I think I've got one more. Yes, okay, so one more. Actually, I'm going to jump in because that one comes next. So, all right, so let's take a look at some examples of how these business rules that we just put into our organization, how they react within a transaction. So we're going to start with a general journal here a moment. So I'm going to jump over to financing, go to my general journals, and I've got one for our office supplies. So remember we said, hey, in office supplies, we can't post a transaction unless the department dimension is populated. So here's my single line transaction for office supplies. And you'll notice as I scroll over here, I've got my dimensions, and notice I do not have a department code. So I want to show you how this reacts when I go to, and I'm just going to preview posting. Oh, excuse me, preview post, and this was what you will see. So I preview the post. Oh, it throws up a message to me, okay? Says select a dimension value for department because GL code 61400. So our office supplies account requires that dimension. So it's throwing up that message when I try to post the transaction. Now I go back, I correct it, and I say, all right, let's go ahead and put that to sales. And then if I preview post that, you'll notice it will actually go through and there it is. It would actually post. So very cool. So it stops you at that posting point, displays the message very clearly, telling you what's going on and why it won't post, and gives you the ability to see that information. So let's take a look at another example. The next one is, let's see. All right, this is where we're hitting that grant, and we're going to try to post to that production department. Remember, we put in those limitations on that particular dimension that says if we're using a grant and we're posting, we're limiting to specific departments. So here I've identified my grant, and notice I posted to the production department. So I'll go ahead and preview post this, and we'll take a look at what the reaction is. So it says here, dimension combination, department, prod, and grants can't be used concurrently. So it's telling me that I have to change that combination. It is not allowed in our system. So it gives me that error message right out of the gate. Very cool. Okay, next thing I want to show you, kind of going back to our whole list of dimension. Remember in our GL setup, I said we could do shortcuts up to 8 dimensions in the system. Well, you notice I've put all of those dimensions on our data entry line. Well, remember my list had 10 dimensions in it. So the question is, well, how do I add that other dimension, the number 9 or 10 that's in my list that I can't see on my screen because they're not shortcut dimensions? Here's how we do that. So we go up to, what do we, I think we go to navigate, line, here we are, navigate line, dimensions, and now it pulls down the dimension values that I've already got set, right? Because I've set those in the screen, but now I can actually reach out to those lower dimensions that do not appear as a shortcut in my grid, but I can select my zone now and identify what zone that is. So that's how I would get to those particular dimensions that are beyond my shortcut list, right? So beyond 8 dimensions, now I need to go into the line on the transaction and actually pull in that dimension. But again, that's unlimited. We could add 30 dimensions to a line if you wanted to. It may drive your users a little crazy and you might have a lot of turnover because of that. But anyway, you have some really good reporting at the end anyway. So that's how we assign a dimension that is not in our shortcut list, but we can pull it in through the line and set that dimension value. So super cool. All right. Finally, let's talk about the last business rule that we set up was on a sales order. So remember, we said whenever a customer is used in a transaction, we want to make sure that our product line is assigned to that particular transaction. So I believe I have a sales order out here. Let's take a look. I do. There it is. All right, so we're going to grab this sales order. So again, this transaction has that customer record on it. So I'm going to go ahead and try to post this. I'll preview post this one just like we did the other transaction. And it's telling me that the product line dimension must have a value. So I have not added the product line on this transaction. So again, the system is stopping me before it posts everything through, enforcing those business rules, creating accuracy and consistency in my transaction entries, and telling me that I need to put in that particular product line. And I can't remember if I exposed product line on here. I believe I did. It's called this. For whatever reason, my system just hasn't caught up with the naming convention on that. But now that I've assigned that, if I go ahead and preview posting, you'll notice, oh, I must have, oh, you know what? It's at the header. It's not at the line item, which is interesting. So in this transaction, my order, I do it at the header level, not at the line item. So I'm going to assign it because the customer record is actually sitting at the header record of this transaction. So I will go ahead and put in my product line here and then define it that way. So here we go. And that should resolve, and then it will trickle that through the line items. And now if I post, we will have a successful posting, and there it goes. So it's actually creating that transaction, or would, I didn't actually post it. So that is how we can enforce some business rules by using our dimensions and those characteristics that are associated with our dimensions. So we talked about dimension combinations where we can limit uh, different usage of dimensions. We talked about requiring a dimension on a GL account, and then we talked about requiring a dimension when a particular record is used, like our customer record. So in it, again, that all results in accurate and easy reporting in the end. So the more transactions we can tag with a dimension value, the better we're going to be with our reporting, and it just makes things that much easier. So I hope this was helpful. If you guys have any questions, we have more videos coming out on our YouTube channel. So stay tuned, subscribe, and we have just a ton of fun doing these videos for you guys. So hopefully this was helpful. Drop a comment or anything that you would like to give us some feedback, and we appreciate your time today. Have a great one. As always, take care and have a great day.